All right, we are live. 48-hour art check. I don't even know a number. I don't know. The world's ending. So it's I
200 and
think
something.
226, I think is where we're at. So yeah, something like that.
Yes,
All right, here we are.
we are.
Oh yeah, I didn't go Monday. I didn't go live on Monday with Scott. I just sent him a note, and Scott's such a good guy. He's like, hey, whatever you need. But like I had, like many of us, just you just watch so many people be so brutal to each other. I just can't handle it. I've seen just too many police brutality things, and I mean, the world just watched a man murdered, on live TV, and I
Yeah.
so anyway, so I had to take a couple of days, and I was a little hesitant today as well, but
Same here. Same here.
yeah. So I don't know. I mean, I want some form of normalcy, but also, the idea that things are wrong and need to change, and that there are systemic built-in issues. I think that that needs to be addressed as well.
Yep.
But at the same time, I can't. None of us can just live 100% of our lives in total pedal to the metal adrenaline
True.
outrage all the
True.
time. So this is my first effort at trying to balance out my week, and we have no idea what we're going to talk about today, but we'll see how it goes.
We're here. We're going to do our best.
So
yeah, man, I agree with the notion of living pedal to the metal. There was a short period of my life where I was convinced that I was going to be a professional protester for the remainder of my life, and it was hard. It was exhausting. And if anybody knows anything about politics, things take a long time.
Right.
So you might be angry today, but that change you want to see, except in certain cases, like especially now, things are being pushed to move faster than they would ever move, which is a good thing. But typically, change takes time. And so you have to keep up with it. You have to go to every protest, email every month or whatever the cause is. Like there's a constant attention to that kind of stuff. And I had to drop out of school because I was spending too much time doing that, and not enough time in school, and it affects things. But yeah, it's rough, and I really commend the people who are literally able to dedicate their lives to it. Honestly, it's a good fight because they're fighting for everyone, literally everyone. Maybe they're upset about something that happened to one person or a close family member or whatever, but if they get change, we all get change. I don't mean I'm kind of like taking on a topic now, and I don't mean to, but honestly, that's my biggest takeaway of all of this is I support everything they're doing, because if they get what they're after, it affects everyone, literally everyone.
Right.
That's the biggest problem that I've had of sort of the opposition to what's happening is it's going to protect the people that you're talking about too, like the all lives matter stuff, the blue lives matter stuff, all that. If what they want happens, the police are protected too. White people are protected too. Chinese people.
Right.
Everybody benefits from being human and treating humans the same. Everybody benefits from that. Not a single person loses.
Yeah. And the whole Black Lives Matter, All Lives Matter debate shouldn't even be a debate, because it's not. I mean, and this is the problem with language, is that it's limiting. Yes. and that things get taken out of context, things get co-opted. There might be somebody that, like, all of a sudden says, hey, people who wear a black shirt believe this.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, I didn't decide that, and I have a black shirt on today.
Yeah. I had that happen to me today, actually. I'm sorry.
Yeah. No, go ahead.
So, okay. I'm probably, maybe I'll lose some fans from talking about this. I was a little, I could kind of understand where this person was coming from. But so there's a way that you can search things on Facebook where you can get like a little link that directly searches something specific. And so like you can copy that link and share it. And then everybody else who clicks it will get their own version of the information. So for example, people who like Superman. Okay. And you click that link and on your friends list, it'll show you all your friends who like Superman. So somebody did this for Donald Trump and was like, hey, I found an easy solution for everybody looking to clear out their friends lists. Check out all your friends who support Donald Trump. And immediately I had to respond because I'm like, wait a minute, that liking that man's page does not mean anyone supports him. I find him to be a complete asshole, and I like paying attention to what he's doing from his perspective in his words so that I'm informed. So yeah, I like Donald Trump. To follow what that man is doing, do not support him. 1,000% do not support him. So you have a lot of that too, where you might equate something with something, but it doesn't mean that that's correlation doesn't equal causation, right? That's the phrase. A lot of people find correlations and immediately jump on them as, well, there's proof, there it is. I guess I got to write that person off. So you have to be really, really careful. Language is so important. Associations are important. I mean, I would think the way I try to live my life, and I'm probably not the best example, but I'm to a fault very neutral about things because I take so much time to absorb and try to see both sides, which is incredibly difficult and horrifying at times to put yourself in that mindset of someone that you might find disgusting. But I feel that's the best way to go about coming to a conclusion about somebody before writing them off completely.
My bias is to assume that anyone in power, regardless of their political affiliation, is trying to screw everyone underneath them.
That's a fairly decent premise to start with.
That's how I approach the world. It's not great, but I don't see a lot of difference between power corrupts and anyway. But yeah, so I don't know. Should we do an art check or should we just keep riffing on this?
I mean, I didn't get anything done this week. My progress is I have a lot more gray hairs now in a very startlingly short amount of time. Okay. That's my progress.
I got a really cool client project where I am doing. I don't want to give anything away because I'm not on an NDA or anything, but it's not ready. But I'm designing graffiti lettering for a line of products that's going to come out. And I'll give you a quick sneak peek without actually giving anything away. Let's see if I can do this. Can I do that? So here's some of these kind of things that I'm doing. So anyway, these are just sketches, but it was kind of cool because a buddy of mine, and he former student, called me up and just said, "Hey, do you want to do this?" And I'm thinking like Joshua Kimball and, so many people that are better at lettering than I am. I was like, it's like, why, like, I don't know. And, so then he starts, and this is just a good indication of, he starts pulling up stuff from my Instagram and telling me, like, I want it to look like this. I was like, okay, well, if you want it to look like things I've already done, then you already know what you're in for. So, but anyway, he was pretty excited. So I got that done. And then I've been working on the credits of the short, and the guy, my friend Paul, that's doing the music for me, sent me some stuff this morning. So
cool.
So there's some minor progress.
Nice.
And then I think challenges are obvious.
Across the board.
Yeah.
It's
so anyway,
It's been interesting around here too. Like we've just in terms of challenges, uh, just stuff, life stuff. You got the Corona stuff. You've got new ordinances and stuff, at least in our area, from the police and the mayor and all that. We've actually are. I live in the middle of nowhere, and we have rioting and looting and stuff. I mean, we in our town, there's one Target within like an hour of here. Now we have no Target. It's gone. I mean, they're really going to have a lot of work to do to get that thing back up and running. Unfortunately, like a lot of small businesses, that was what like kills me the most. Like I can understand. I don't even know if I should talk about this because I know some people don't feel this way at all, but a lot of these businesses are just owned by people in the community, you know,
Right.
and I can understand the rage against the corporation because they perpetuate these things that we're fighting against. They do. They donate to these people that allow these things to happen. You can find lists of corporations that allow this stuff to happen because their money allows these people to stay in office. I mean, go smash up a Wendy's for crying out loud. You know, like there's, you know, never mind. I didn't say that. I'm not condoning anything.
um, and then this is my the side of me that is
language.
Right. This is the side of me. This is the side of me that my natural inclination is to believe that there's somebody pulling the strings behind the curtain. And there are videos out there of these protests being infiltrated by people who are obviously not from the area and obviously not protesting. They are just breaking windows and spray painting walls to amplify and incite violence.
Yep.
I don't know who is doing that, but to me, it seems weird that there is a coordinated effort.
So weird.
Nationwide to turn these protests violent. And I'm sure that there are legitimate protesters that are doing things that are, you know, not legal or whatever. But there is a lot of evidence of people that are doing this that are not involved. There's message boards on white supremacy groups that are call to arms to go get your loot on, you know, and all that. And there's video after video after video of the police starting the inciting incident.
Yeah. A lot.
Yeah.
Overwhelming amount. I mean, geez.
And this is my problem with language when we talk about language is everything that people assume based on their experiences that isn't directly said. And it's like Black Lives Matter. When someone says Black Lives Matter, a lot of people assume that there's an only in front of that and that they're saying only Black Lives Matter. That's not the case.
There's actually a two at the end of it.
Right. Yeah. And it's like, it's not that only Black Lives Matter or that Black Lives Matter more.
Right.
It's that right now, and over the last few years, there is a disproportionate amount of the judicial system that targets a specific skin color. Mm-hmm. That is a problem. It is statistically an issue. It is culturally an issue, and it's a systemic issue. And so, but when I say stuff like this, my concern is what everybody else is bringing to that experience, because our perception of reality, my perception of reality, your perception of reality is based on our bias. It's based on our experience, and it's based on, you know, well, you look like a guy that I knew once that did X, you know, or you sound like a person that did Y, or, you know, I've been told that people who, you know, are, you know, your religion are like this, you know, or whatever. And I was watching an interesting TED Talk, rewatching. I'd watched it before. She doesn't say her name, so I can't pronounce, I don't want to pronounce it wrong, but it's The Danger of a Single Story. It's a fascinating TED Talk. And I think a lot of people she's African, lives in America, is a writer. And I believe she grew up in Nigeria. Her mom was an administrator. Her dad was a professor, and so she was super confused when she came to America, and her roommate was like trying to teach her how to use the stove, and had assumed that she didn't know what technology was, and was surprised. She's like, how did you learn English so well? She's like, it's the official language of the country that I grew up in, and but it's because her roommate had seen, a war-torn, impoverished single story of Africa and assumed that everybody from Africa is like this. And she said one of the things that she hates is that Africa, which is a continent, is referred to as a country, and she's like, I have no idea what it's like to live in the Congo or to grow up in Nairobi or,
Right.
I don't know, and so anyway, but she talks about this idea of the single story. And I think this concept of the single story is the danger of a single story is fascinating, because if you only hear repeated one thing about some demographic or psychographic, you will unintentionally think that that's the only thing, right? And that's why representation matters. That's why diversity matters, is because if the only Asian guy that I see in movies knows kung fu, then the single story that I believe is that every Asian guy knows kung fu. And that's like, Asians are as diverse as white people are in their activities and their likes and their dislikes and everything else. And so the idea that everyone who does X or looks X or is X is like this, is a huge problem.
Yeah. And that's why I agree with a lot of the messaging and stuff that they try to get across in media. And I know that's an extremely controversial topic right now, because we're not supposed to take our superheroes and do things to them and stuff like that. But I think what a lot of people miss when they look at something like, I'm not going to pull any specific examples because I don't want to die on that hill defending a fictional character. Right. But let's just say there's some new movie coming out, and it's you watch it and you hear these complaints all the time that it was just so obvious that it had some political agenda, and it was about this minority figure and trying to show that they're like, super badass and stuff. Like, we get it. And it's like, but the reason it exists is because people still don't get it. Maybe you do, right, and that's good, but it exists because people still need to understand that character can be a real person. And there's people who don't think that, and that's okay, because in the 80s and the 90s, I remember growing up with a lot of action movies, a lot of cool, just, you got some badass dude and he's got a sidekick. And you know what? The sidekick was always a black dude. Sidekick was always an Asian dude. Sidekick was always a Mexican dude. They were always funny. They were always a little bit goofy and quirky and not quite the hero. But the fact is, there's people in this world who are Mexican, are Asian, they are black, and they are the hero. Right. And we need to see that. We need to see that so that not only people who aren't that ethnicity know that it exists, but so that people who are that ethnicity knows that they can be that, because we've been telling them that they can't. We've been telling them that they're sidekicks for years. And that was progress. The sidekick was progress. Right. Yeah. So it gets me angry and it gets me riled up, because this is so important. And I can understand the rage at every extent of it. I mean, at some point, like you said, there's bubbles, we'll say. There's the one story. You have to read other stories. You have to be open to other stories. You just have to be, before you can really assess the situation and make that decision as to whether or not what's happening is appropriate to the situation. Currently, I mean, geez, I've been thinking about this. I was talking with my wife last night. There's somebody's grandmother that's still alive today who was there in the 60s when shit was really bad. Just think about that. Like, I'm getting really choked up thinking about if I had a relative that could tell me, oh, I was alive when, if I were hanging outside a nightclub, some cop could just walk up, beat my ass, and then arrest me for fighting back. Right. what? And
Well,
that was within someone's lifetime who's still alive,
and the example you give could have happened last week.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's
exactly.
That's the tragedy to me, is like recently, if you think about the course of human history, recently, not only was it legal, but it was normal, and nobody thought it was weird for a person to own another person, like property, and that they could do anything that I could do with property. Mm-hmm. I can take a chair that I don't like outside and light it on fire, and people can't say, "Hey, you can't do that to that chair," because it's my chair. It's my driveway. It's my chair. I can do whatever I want. And people used to think of human beings that way.
Mm-hmm.
And that was very recently. If you think about how long ago that was not a long time ago. No. That grandmother that you're thinking about had relatives who might have been in that situation.
Yeah.
That's insane. You don't have to go that far back.
It is. And to add on to that too,
yeah.
In addition to that grandmother being alive, those assholes who were doing all that stuff to people, their ancestors are still alive too. In fact, maybe a grandfather or grandmother of some KKK member or whatever is still alive. So that is still alive. It is too recent for it to not be. Old habits die hard. Prejudices die even harder, because they're not only built into our feelings about people, but they're built into our little cultural things, our vernacular for things. Like I love my family to death, but my family has some words they use to call certain things. A lot of people do in America. Little names or little terms you use. I'm not going to repeat any of them, because since I was a child, it bothered me to hear it. But that's the kind of stuff that allows that racism to live on, because you say that word and sure, you're talking about a type of nut, or you're fixing something or whatever, but you're also dehumanizing people. You're also lessening their status in society, that you can say that and it's this quirky little thing, and that's not okay. Like that hurts too. That keeps these things going too. And so, to tie it back to what I was saying, that grandfather still alive. Well, his son's probably still alive. They grew up with those terms. They grew up with those ideals. I guarantee they're not going away that easy. They just aren't. And so we have to be active. It isn't over. It can't be. That's impossible. Without any kind of real reform, it can't be. And if you really dig into the history, there's so many things that have happened over the last several decades that we never made an effort to undo. People warned us about white supremacy groups infiltrating our Fed, the police. I mean, geez, and we didn't do anything about it. We never got an end to that story. Hey, we found them. That didn't happen. That news article never came out. So yeah, we got some problems, and I think we're seeing it loud and clear right now on the news. I think you can see it all. I mean, we're with cell phones around and videotape available. I think you can clearly see what departments have the most problems and where we should draw our attention,
Right. And I mean, the idea of language in that is important, because I don't think it's possible. This is a belief that I hold. But I don't think it's possible for a human being to hurt someone that they empathize with.
God, no.
I think you have to other them. You have to objectify them. You have to dehumanize them before you're able to be violent.
Absolutely.
Every act of violence that you see, whether it's perpetrated on a big level or an individual one-on-one level, it starts with dehumanizing language. It starts with othering language. It starts with saying, you're not like me, because we have a natural biological instinct to not harm ourselves.
Yep.
And so if I relate to someone, and I have a good example of this, if you're ever on the freeway and you get cut off by somebody and their car looks a specific way and you assume a specific thing and you are pissed, and in your mind, you're saying, oh, that dumb whatever, right? It doesn't even have to be racially motivated. I'm just saying you could just be calling them an idiot, right? Or whatever. It's some language that makes them different than you. And you pass them and they look like your mom or they look like you, or they look different than you assumed that they looked. Maybe they're a cute old man, and you're like, oh, all of a sudden you're not pissed.
Yeah.
Because they remind you of your grandpa, or they remind you of someone that you empathize with.
Mm-hmm.
That is exactly what the anger stemmed from. The anger stemmed from the dehumanizing and the othering in that interaction that you had.
Yep.
And so we're okay with doing that. And whenever someone rises to power based on taking a group of people and saying we should all dislike this group of people, things are their fault, that is a huge red flag throughout history. Yeah. You don't have to look very far to see that whenever that happens on any continent, and it happens on, maybe it doesn't happen on Antarctica, right? I don't know. But like the populated continents, you can pick any major company that has had, or country that has had, despotism and dictatorship and oppression from the powerful. Mm-hmm. They dehumanize. It's one of the major things, because that instinct, again, that I don't want to hurt myself. I also don't want to feel bad, and I don't want things to be my fault.
Right.
If it's my fault, then I have to do something about it. And so if I can just get rid of my guilt by saying, it's the people who wear the purple shirts, or it's people who are tall, or it's people who look like this, or are this color, or are this religion, then it's not me, and I don't have to deal with that guilt. I can just say, good, I have no work to do here. I can move on, right? I can live my life how I want to live it, because the problems I'm experiencing aren't my fault.
Right. Yeah.
So, yeah.
That's powerful. And that's very true. I'm a very empathetic person. I'm constantly apologizing for bumping into people in Walmarts and stuff. Just that alone. Yeah. I couldn't imagine actually hurting somebody.
Well, I was thinking if anybody's having trouble understanding what's going on right now, and I recognize and want to publicly state that two white guys,
right? Yeah,
trying to tell people what's going on right now. I have no idea.
Also, I should say this. I say this all the time because I get into heated debates on Facebook and stuff about stuff that is way above my pay grade. I'm a fucking cartoonist. Okay. If you're coming to me for how to live your life, that's your problem. All right. I'm just a guy speaking my mind.
Yeah. So I understand that. And I want to acknowledge my ignorance, but also say that I'm doing everything I can to try to empathize, because that's how I live my life, is I try to empathize. And so in attempting empathy, I was trying to come up with a situation. What if artists were visibly identified? What if you could tell an illustrator from some visible thing, and then you saw nationwide, incident after incident after incident, artists getting pulled out of their cars, artists being killed in the streets, artists getting a disproportionately large amount of punishment compared to non-artists, and you're in that group. I can feel some of that. I can feel some of that when it becomes something like that, or somebody in my religion. I come from a religious history where we were literally hunted. It doesn't happen anymore, and we're definitely not in the minority. But at one point in time, there were states in the South that had it on the books that it was okay to kill us. It's called the extermination order. And it was, the governor just said, it's fine. You won't be prosecuted. It's okay.
Jeez.
That was on the books. That was on the books until the 80s. Like, it wasn't enforced, but it was legal technically. And so I never experienced that. I never had that personal experience, but trying to find points in my life where I can empathize and say, what would I be feeling if I was part of one of these marginalized groups?
Right.
um, that helps. At least it helps me to understand, like, I care a lot less about things than I do about people.
Hmm. Hmm.
And another thing, I know I'm ranting here, but another thing that is a new concept in humanity is that a single human life is valuable. You go back a little while, and single human lives were spent like currency.
Right.
You know, it's really only in our lifetime that we've started to count and care about the number of soldiers that die in a war,
Right.
because we have robots that can kill people now, which is another terrifying thing, that we're using predator drones to run hexagonal patterns over
Yeah.
surveil the protesters that are going on. This is not a good move. But anyway, like, it's recently. I mean, they're with my parents and my parents' parents' generations. If you were drafted, you were you were considered fodder.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, it was expected that you wouldn't come back from certain wars.
Hmm.
That's a lot that we're not used to. You go back a little bit further, and I was talking about this morning, but um, humanity wasn't a given. Like, it wasn't like we would expect that there was going to be human beings in a generation, and everything in society was not based around the individual, but it was based around the survival of the village, or the survival of the tribe, or the survival of the whatever. You look at ancient Greece, you look at Egypt, you look at ancient Japan, and you see that their societies were built around making sure that there was a society again in the next generation. In ancient Greece, you have people who, there were two rules: women are required to risk their life in childbirth, men are required to risk their life in war. That was it. There were a lot of other rules, but they were all based around those two things: is we need to have more babies and we need to protect them. That's it. And nowadays, like, we don't have the same viewpoint,
No.
for the better. I mean, whether you're Christian or not, when Christ said, leave the 99 and go after the one, that was a revolutionary concept. Is a revolutionary concept to say that, like, an individual soul has worth. And so it always drives me nuts when people are saying, well, let's look at the numbers and whatever. It's like, one is too many,
Yeah.
because each person has value regardless of what they have done. There's intrinsic value in a human life regardless of their actions.
Yes. To add on to that too, speaking of language mattering, I think numbers, statistics, that's a form of language as well, and that language often gets misused and distorted and misinterpreted as well, to obscure what that data actually means. I'll point out one example that I just want to say this. I just think people need to think about this point of view of this particular topic. A lot of people throw out this statistic that cops in America technically, statistically, kill more white people than they do black people. I've looked into it. While that's somewhat true, you have to look at the ratio there. If you kill 100 white people, well, white people aren't a minority. If you kill 100 black people, that's probably more than exists in most neighborhoods in your less densely populated areas. That's huge and significant,
Right.
because what that is saying, the language there, is that the majority of that population are criminal, which isn't true.
Right.
It just isn't true. That's just flat out not true. And so the moment you start to accept those statistics at face value, the moment you start to accept all the gymnastics that you had to go through to ignore this and ignore that, and step past all these problems to arrive at this conclusion here that, oh, we don't have a problem, so let's move forward. And
Right.
that is an extraordinary exercise in delusion and I'm having a hard time coming up with the word here, but cognitive dissonance. There we go.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, and there might not be cognitive dissonance because that means that you're holding two conflicting ideas in your mind.
Okay,
And
true.
it could be that you didn't question the statistic.
That could be as well. That could
You
be you
accepted it.
didn't go through all that. You don't have that information available. That's
Right.
true too.
Because we all grew up with whatever stories we were told. I mean, that's how human beings are able to process information, is through the telling of stories. And that idea of, the one story, the danger of the one story, like, I lived in a neighborhood at one point in time in an apartment complex because I was an idiot, and I moved to a big city. I'd never lived in a big city before, and I just got like the cheapest rent that I could get.
Ooh,
I didn't know that's what I had done everywhere else that I had lived, right?
yeah.
And so it happened to be full of drug dealers and prostitutes and pimps, and it was not great, right? And this was
That myself.
right, and this is like, and so like, I could just tell that story and say big cities are like this, because that was the one single experience that I had with a population over 40,000. It's the only town I've ever lived in at the time that had more than 40,000 people in it. It had 500,000 people in it, which for some cities isn't that big, but for me, that was huge.
Mm-hmm.
And I lived there for 3 years. And then I moved several times. I lived in other places, and I realized, oh, that's not a great apartment complex.
Right. Yeah.
But that's not what the city is like.
Exactly.
Right?
Yep.
I mean, there's broken glass, and there's gunfights, and there were cars getting broken into and all this stuff. And then you go 2 blocks down the road and it's fine.
Yeah.
I mean, I lived 2 miles from there, and it was great.
I have so many experiences like that. Chicago is constantly getting flack for being this horrible, war-torn city. And I've lived all over Chicago, and I've worked all over Chicago. And I've had several experiences exactly like what you were just describing, where, yeah, I was fearful too, even despite growing up around or in and around the city my whole life. There's certain things you're not prepared for. Maybe you didn't have that particular experience. And a really funny thing, almost exactly like what you were describing, we had like an emergency move. We just had to get out of this one place and get to another, and we didn't have much time to think about it. So we were looking for cheap rent, and we were looking for something that we could move in fast. And we found a place. It was a nice, cool little place. It seemed fine when we went to go and check it out. We moved in that night. Someone got kidnapped and tossed into a van right outside of the apartment. Some guy downstairs was screaming and throwing bottles up at our window. I heard neighbors from across the way talking about me while I was doing things in my own home. It was the weirdest thing I've ever experienced in my life. Like, they were talking on the phone. I wasn't even listening, and I was just like making my sandwich, and then I go to eat a pickle, and then someone's like, yeah, this pickle eating motherfucker right here. I'm like, what? What did I do? I just moved here like a few days ago.
Right.
Anyways, sorry for all the cussing. I've been cussing a lot today.
Yeah. So,
but to the end of my story being, we got the hell out of there because it was literally dangerous to go from where we were on our, in our apartment to the train that we both needed to take for work. We constantly got harassed and followed by gangs and stuff. Like, literally, not like, oh, scary people. Like, no, they literally followed us, and they would, cat calls and stuff like that. So we moved somewhere else. And then like a couple years later, we found this really awesome apartment. We loved it. It was in a great neighborhood. And it turned out it was down the street from that place. It was literally down the street from that place. Didn't even realize it until we went to walk around the block one day, and we saw that building. We're like, wait a minute, is this? No, that can't be. But it's so nice 2 minutes away.
Right.
But, yeah. And there's a lot.
So, I mean, that's anytime politics come up, which I typically don't discuss publicly. But anytime there's reform or policies or news stories, it always drives me nuts, because I have a degree in communication, and I teach in the communication department. Mm-hmm. I have an advanced degree in illustration and graphic design, but my undergraduate is in communication. And what drives me nuts is how little is being said and how much is being generalized. Mm. And I think both of those stories, you could take them out of context and think all that. But what we're saying is that, like, if that was our only experience, we could assume a ton of things.
Oh yeah.
And then I could go and start telling people, oh man, Spokane is blah, 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 and all this stuff. And I had a single experience and then I left, but I stuck around and I moved around and I met different people and I changed things up. And so I have multiple stories from that city now.
Yeah.
And it changes things. And the problem with mass communication is it is ineffective in communicating the whole truth.
Mm-hmm.
Just inherent in the system, we don't have the time or the attention span to be able to delve into those topics. And so every piece of communication that you get that isn't a personal experience over the course of months
Mm-hmm.
is going to be truncated, generalized, and not the entire truth.
Yeah.
That doesn't make it a lie, but it doesn't make it wholly true or easily applicable to every other situation.
Yeah.
And so that's my problem is when people say, oh, people shouldn't be looting and rioting. Well, that's a generalized statement, and generally speaking, sure, but at the same time, what else are they supposed to do?
Right.
Right? What else are we supposed to do at this point when we've been trying to do it peacefully and
Yep.
everybody keeps telling them that you're doing it wrong.
Right.
Yeah, don't kneel, don't obstruct traffic, don't be there, don't do this, don't do it that way, don't do it this way, right? And then on the flip side of things, I'm not even convinced that the real protesters are the ones that are inciting any of the violence in the first place.
Right. Yeah.
And there's lots of evidence, lots of video evidence to show that the police and some sort of either
Whoever they
elements, whether they are organized or random, are inserting themselves into those situations. And then there's statements about that are turning out to be untrue. You've got governors and mayors saying certain percentages of everybody we've arrested are out of state. And then they come back and they say, oh, actually, I was a little bit wrong on that. Or, like I walk that back. And if you hear part of that statement and not the follow-up, or you hear the follow-up and not the first part, you're getting incomplete information.
Yeah.
And so I think it all comes down to one main thing. It doesn't matter how you justify violence against someone. It's wrong.
Yes. Yeah.
No matter who they are, what they've done or haven't done, or what you assume they've done, either correctly or incorrectly, an individual human life is worth something. There's value, no matter how that life is packaged.
Yeah.
And so this, okay, now I'm getting lectury, but this is where I think artists have, I don't want to say responsibility because I don't want to put that on anyone.
Right.
But I do want to say that we have an opportunity. We have the ability to communicate in a way that most people do not. We have taken the time to hone a skill that is extremely effective. They've done studies that something that triggers an emotion has a greater impact on that individual as far as their long-term memory and their opinions of things. This is why political cartoons are so effective.
Mm-hmm.
Is because when we say
up real fast over a political cartoon,
right?
Because it communicates a broad idea, or a very, maybe not broad is the right word, but a larger idea in a very small package.
Yeah. Visuals are an extremely effective form of communication because you can get a lot across in a very short amount of time. Yeah. And what you can show, and because they're nuanced, they're layered. Your understanding of them can be symbolic. Mm-hmm. And the interesting thing about symbolic understanding rather than literal face value understanding, or what we might call denotation, the definition of something, the literal letter of the law type thing, is that it's layered, and that as you change, your approach to that art changes. That's why we have this discussion. Does it hold up? Right? Your experience with a piece of media as a child is different than your experience with a piece of media as an adult, because your experience with that piece of media is a two-way street. It's what you bring to the table and how you perceive that artwork through the experiences and perception that you have.
Mm-hmm.
That's what you experience. It's not just the book. It's not just the cartoon. It's not just the movie. It's what you brought to that.
Yep.
I mean, a friend of mine, I won't name names, but a friend of mine showed a short film of mine to his wife, and she's an illustrator, a published children's book illustrator. And this is not my intention with that cartoon at all. But she said, wow, he really hates publishers. And I thought that's such a fascinating interpretation of what I produced. And I could see how somebody might draw that from that. And that's the interesting thing about artwork is intention matters, but that's not the experience that people have with the artwork. And so you come to that cartoon that you loved as a kid, and you come to it 10, 15, 20 years later. Well, you've had decades of life and experience and memories and opinions and thoughts and feelings. And you bring all those with you every time. We call it baggage. We're constantly carrying that with us when we experience something. And so you come to that and you experience that thing and you're like, ooh, that does not hold up. Right. Yeah. And so the interesting thing is, we have an opportunity as artists, as creators, as writers, as filmmakers, as cartoonists, as illustrators, as animators, to be able to communicate in a way that you can say really interesting things in a very powerful way in a short period of time. Anyway, it's just something I've been thinking about. And I don't think it's a good idea to go out of your way to do something that you feel is important. I think first you should serve the story, right? And tell good stories. But at the root, good stories are relatable and you can empathize with the people in the story. And if you can empathize with the people in the story, people will draw conclusions from that. And if you have representation, and if you have diversity, and if you have nuance in the conversation, if you've got somebody on the religious right and they're a stereotypical token religious right, or you've got somebody that's a lefty pinko commie and they're a stereotypical Berkeley Birkenstock wearing lefto pinky commie, like who else can you put in that situation to to round that out and to add some nuance, because that's going to be relatable, because I've never actually met somebody that isn't nuanced.
Yeah.
I've never met,
at least a little bit.
Yeah.
Nuanced,
No, I mean, there are people that live their life more black and white and people that live their life more in the gray. But I think everybody that you come up against, why do they think that?
Right.
There's a story there. There's a series of experiences. Like, vilifying people because they're different than you is a huge problem.
It is. And so people say things like, oh, everybody's so sensitive these days and stuff. It's just that people in general are getting more fed up with having to be silent and having to just endure a culture that is antagonistic, intentionally or unintentionally antagonistic, because that's what it is. If you generalize somebody and you point your finger at them and laugh about it, that's not a positive thing you're doing.
No. Yeah. And I think generally speaking, anytime you assume or anytime you generalize, you're on shaky water. And it's interesting because, or shaky ground. I don't know what shaky water is. I don't know what that analogy is. But shaky ground, right? Yeah, right. But the idea is if you take, and this is hard to do, but this is another existentialist point, is that we naturally approach people as objects. Our natural inclination, and this isn't good, but this is the way that we perceive the world, is how is this person going to interact with me? We objectify them by saying, what can they do for me? What can I gain from them? Are they a threat? Everything that we do is in our initial interactions with people, unless we go out of our way to overcome this, is narcissistic in its selfishness. Is how does this impact me? And so the challenge, and what I would recommend, and what I try and and fail and try again at is try to approach each individual as a new experience and get to know them as them, rather than as, what they want and what they need and what they hope for and what they fear and what they love and what they hate, and get to know them as an individual, as a package, rather than taking your preconceived notions and assumptions with you and making assumptions about who they are based on experiences you've had in the past, or worse, the single story that you've been told, or whatever. And in doing that, you've got something where you have the ability to approach people as people rather than people as objects. But recognizing that you're going to objectify naturally, I think, is important, because not everything that we do naturally is good. Just because it's an instinct doesn't mean it's helpful or useful, right? And so, yeah, I think that's important. But with that, I was just thinking, with all of this going on, it's an opportunity to examine, how we feel about things, how we perceive things, and what we might do to help. And I mean, offline, I've been having conversations with people about great books to read about this. I've read books over the years that have been really eye-opening. But what art might you create? What books might you write? What videos might you make that could help? What organizations can you donate to? Because I think the worst thing that can happen is when a nation hurts, a group of people hurts, a society hurts, a world mourns, which is happening right now. And the result of that is that we do that and take no action, and then move on and try to numb it and forget about it.
Yeah.
And so if you are suffering, if you are hurting, if you are empathizing with people who are suffering or hurting, the solve to that is to take action, to do something, donate, vote, speak out, create,
email
make.
That's too. I've been seeing this idea. I can't remember the guy's name right now, but I can find it if you wanted to share a link or something. But they're proposing a bill that's going to repeal a former bill that is doing a lot of harm in terms of people's ability to prosecute police when they're brutalized. And that bill was put in place during the Jim Crow era. Fill in the blanks, you can understand where I'm going with this.
Right.
So that's a huge step to take. And I made sure I'm emailing my congressman, I'm emailing my senator about it. I don't know if they agree with it. I don't know if they even know anything about it, but I want them to look at that. I want them to consider that. And, maybe they don't care, but it's something. And if they do, then it gets through to them and they can do something. But the more of us that do that, the more they're aware of issues that we genuinely care about. But we have to be aware of those issues too. That's a huge important thing.
Yeah. And if you as a voting public care about it and your representative doesn't care about it, then you vote them out.
Yes. And also, I don't want to be this person, but I would stress it even more for white people, because as much as I hate to admit it, as ugly as it is, that a lot of white people in power listen to white people more. And the more of us speak out, the more of us share our experiences and tell them that we're on this side and that we want these changes, that unfortunately, but the more apt they are to listen to it, the more apt they are to take it seriously. Because the white vote to them is a massive loss if they lose it. I mean, and I'm trying to be careful with how I say these things. I'm speaking about a corrupt system here and how to.
If you're saying that people in power are corrupt and selfish, I think we're on solid ground there.
Okay.
There's been thousands of years of proof that you give somebody power and they're going to screw it up and become evil. That's one of the problems. I mean, that's one of the problems with any governmental system, is that it relies on people, and you give. That's my problem, and I don't know. Now I'm going to get into policies, but when the military industrial complex it's written into law that they can sell their surplus weapons to Andy Mayberry, and local sheriffs and small. And why on earth does a farming town of 35,000 people need an armored vehicle with a 50 caliber machine gun mounted to the back of it?
Yeah. Yep.
There is a law on the books that allows that to happen. If you think that it's weird that cops show up with military gear, there's something that you can do about that. Mm-hmm. If you think it's problematic, if you believe on the one hand that how you dress affects how you behave, and you're one of those people that thinks that we should show up to work with a shirt and tie on because we're going to be more professional, then I want you to think about what that means when cops show up in riot gear. Mm-hmm. What is the expectation with the way that they showed up to dress?
Yeah. Show up and if you want.
Right. And there's a lot of nuance going on there because of the world that we live in. Yeah. But the paramilitary police is a problem as well. Anyway, lots of systemic issues that we are not going to solve today.
I like what you said, though, about artists and having this ability to kind of shed light on some of this stuff. And I think especially if you have a story, if you have an experience and you can find a way to share it, I think that's a good thing. I was just talking to you before the show about something that I'd like to do because it's important. And if as allies, I don't know who's watching right now, but I'm just speaking for myself and anybody else who is white, who is watching. It's important to be present in reality. If you see something, say something. That's a common expression that's used to point out criminals. But I say it in terms of in general. If you see something that is wrong, speak up about it. Because you would be surprised how much power you have to stop things simply from being a person who says, hey, stop. I used to say that a lot when I was living in Chicago. Like the reason people got preyed on so much on the CTA trains, we had a really big problem with robbery on the CTA trains for a while, was because one person would be getting robbed while 100 people in the car were watching. Well, if 100 people in the car jumped the person, then that person wouldn't have gotten robbed. Like right. It's a community-minded aspect. If you see a minority person being mistreated, say something and encourage other people around you to join in and say something.
Right.
That's going to stop it. And I'm not suggesting violence, but if you see violence being done and you're willing and able, it's a noble thing to stop somebody from being brutalized and victimized. And it's not a bad thing to do. Maybe you'll get a couple cuts and bruises and some scratches, but you'll have helped somebody and you'll have set a precedent. And that person who was victimizing them may think twice the next time. And that's important.
And the other police officers that weren't kneeling on on Floyd's neck are now up on charges as well.
Yep.
And if they get the full extent of those charges, they will be in as long as the guy who was kneeling on his neck.
Yep.
So, anyway, it's, I don't know. My biggest takeaway is the same thing that I always say, is we need to be kind to each other. We need to empathize with each other, and we need to hear each other's stories.
Yeah.
And so I want to hear your stories. I want you to hear my stories. That's how we connect and empathize with each other, is let's tell each other's stories. And they don't have to be, they can be funny. They can be lighthearted. They can be serious. They can be intense. They can be, whatever. I don't think 1984 or Animal Farm has to be factual to be true. I don't believe in talking animals, but I do believe that there's a lot of value in reading Animal Farm. Right, because there's a lot of truth in that book, and so there's a lot of different ways to do that. It doesn't all have to be autobio, though autobio is great. So anyway, I don't know where I'm going with any of this, but I'm really tired now.
Actually tired. Okay, so I guess as my final thought, I'll propose the hey, what's up technique. I like this technique. I've used it most of my life, and I'll give you an example of how this works. If you're ever in a situation, because everybody has biases, everybody has prejudices. If you're ever in a situation where your biases are becoming unruly and you start feeling suspicious about people, maybe it's in your neighborhood, maybe you're out having a little barbecue and there's some people walking by that, whatever it is, it's doing something to you inside and you're feeling nervous. Say, hey, what's up? Guarantee they're just normal people and they're going to come and talk to you. And I have seen way more than not my method turn out differently than what someone else was thinking at the time. I have a very racist stepdad who has no problem letting you know what he's thinking about at every given moment. And I've heard him rattle off all kinds of suspicious things about people in the neighborhood walking by. And when I start hearing him do that, I look right at them. I go, hey, what's up? They go, oh, hi, nice night, huh? Yeah, it is. Happy Saturday. See you later. That's it. Yeah. Or on some occasions, and this has happened to me just on my own, I make a new friend. Like literally people that I'll hang out with or get invited to something or hear a funny story or whatnot. A lot of times our fear is unwarranted. A lot of times our suspicions are unwarranted. People are just people, And honestly, I think more times than not, if you just say, hey, what's up, you're going to meet somebody and you're going to learn about them. So if you're that type of person that does get nervous and uncomfortable around other people, try it. Just try it. I mean, the worst that's going to happen is they're going to walk away and think you're weird. I guarantee they're not, nothing bad is going to come from that. They might stare at you, especially if they're younger. I've noticed the younger people do not respond as much to the, hey, what's up? Maybe it's because I'm older now. I don't know. But
some weird old man talking to me.
Yeah, hey, what's up? I had a joke about it actually with my wife the other day because we went to the local forest preserve, and there was like an older couple that was driving in as we were driving out, and he did that. Like he put up his hand. A lot of people do that. Maybe it's a Midwest thing, but I would assume in many places it's just like, hey, just like giving you a little hello. And so I did it back to him. I was like, hey, how's it going? Just a friendly, we're passing each other. And then another car came with like some younger people, and I just did it to them, and they were just like, okay. And I started going down this trail of like, where did that come from? Because it seems to be a kind of male thing too. I don't see many females doing that. It kind of seems to be a guy thing. Like, hey, yep, I'm a guy too. All right, cool. And I was thinking, I think it comes from like way in our past, like our prehistoric past, because men were traditionally like, keep the village safe, protect the herd and all that kind of stuff, and very violent. And so I think the little gesture, the little polite, is just like, I don't plan on killing you. And the other guy's like, I don't plan on killing you either. Okay. Without having to communicate anymore. So, it's a good thing to communicate that to somebody, because I think on a primal biological level, you're saying, hey, I'm not threatening and I don't think you are either,
Yeah.
So maybe I'm just weird, but it's my hot take.
I don't think getting to know people and being neighborly is weird.
Not weird.
It's a good thing. All right.
Hello, fellow youth. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So anyway, had lots of people in the chats. Thanks for watching. I don't know. It's be safe out there. Be kind. Do something according to your conscience. And we'll see you guys on Monday.
Adios.